Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with Us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilverty. I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, we have a listener prompt from Kaiser, a listener who submitted some very specific train and boat prompts in the past, both of which very exciting overall. If you want, you can go back and listen to Ride the Lightning and the ship one, which is also really interesting. But his prompt today sounds a little bit like, it is I, Kaiser, and I come to you with a prompt quite vague, a world where steam is king. Most of your restrictions are in the tenant section, so I leave you in charge of this world, a world with a society you need to build, a world with modern conflicts you need to create, and a world with a very big secret. Intriguing, Kaiser. The tenets that we have here are, this is not steampunk, something similar to what in my Dual Bands of Steel universe, Rob has called railpunk. 2, there are only humans. And 3, steam is king. So no diesel, no gas. There may be oil-fired boilers and the like, and there is also maybe electricity, as long as it is generated by steam. So first and foremost, a big thank you to Kaiser for submitting this prompt today. And remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, and submit a prompt. There's a little button for it. You follow the instructions, and we will build your world like we're doing with Kaiser's right now. If you want to follow us on social media, we are on Twitter over at Let's Worldbuild. If you want to come join our Discord and chat with us about world building or whatever, there's a link for that in the description. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can go to our Patreon and give us money there, where we also have patron-only episodes. So exclusive to Patreon, we have once a month-ish, we do our exclusive patron-only episodes. Very fun, very chill. They are called the Aphid Lounge. You'll see those. You've seen the previews for them, I'm sure. But enough shilling. We are getting on to the prompt, and I'm going first this time because my tenet requires a preamble. I ramble enough on this podcast as it is, but today is a little bit different because I wanted to take this in the direction of an alternative history. Now, in the little bit of research that I was doing on the steam engine and everything like that, I came across a little something called the Alipile, which is an ancient, archaic version. It's not actually a steam engine. It's kind of just like the first draft of a steam engine. And of course, that sent me down a historical rabbit hole. And that is where I wanted to get us started first and foremost. So my first tenet is a much more primitive steam engine was created in Iron Age Carthage. Now, the Alipile, as it was built around, or there were historical records of it around 120 to 80 BCE, which is what you would probably consider pre-Roman Empire. It's Roman Republic era. It's after the Greek Dark Ages, and it's in this weird nebulous part of history that I know very little about. So if we get anything historically wrong here, don't worry, we're going to mess it up even further. And also, just excuse us for the ignorance of that time period. But the one thing I'm really excited about talking about here is we're running into the Iron Age, where iron is starting to be far more common in terms of usage, in terms of tools and everything like that. So we're starting there. We're talking Iron Age, Carthage, and Rome. It's before the Punic Wars. My concept that I wanted to run with is that Carthage now has trains that are running on primitive steam engines. So I will stop there because I could literally talk about the implications of this for another 5 minutes, but I will let Courtney and Daniel start with this there because, oh my God, I'm so excited about this.
I love that. That's amazing. And I'm very excited to explore this some more. You were talking before about some like primitive steam engine that you learned about. What was that again?
It is the Alipile. So it's
Alipile.
Aeolipile. It was built in, or well, this version was built, or at least known by Hero is the person who built it
Mm.
allegedly, and was around like Ptolemaic Egyptian era type stuff. Again, this is like a part of history that I know very little about, but the
Mhm.
idea that there's an inventor who's built this kind of novelty thing that's like, oh, look at the wheels spin like kind of on its own. I like the idea that someone, whether it be in Carthage or Egypt or whatever, saw that like goofy thing and said, there's applications for this. We can make this
Mhm.
happen, you
Mhm.
know? So I was originally going to give it to Rome and see like, oh, well, now you have like the Roman Empire, but with trains. But instead, I'm like, you know what's more interesting? Give it to Carthage so it doesn't necessarily fall during the Punic Wars and
Mhm.
see what happens then. I know that's a lot. I know that I'm asking a lot from you and Daniel, and I hope that this is okay. And also, I'm okay with you guys completely fucking this up,
Mhm.
and I'm really excited to see how your tenants are going to fuck with this concept that I have in mind. But again, that's where I'm going. That's where I want to start. Daniel, you've been awfully quiet.
I mean, I like it. I can't wait to see what happens when we ruin
What
it.
you mean? I was going to say what you mean by that is I can't wait to see how I ruin this
Gonna
shit. That's
top
what you
notch.
actually
Yeah.
mean. Yeah.
No, I like the idea of an ancient society having access to this technology.
Me too, yeah.
I thought that was really like I was looking up like, oh dang, I didn't know that like the ancient Greeks had like central heating and stuff like that. It was
Mm.
very expensive and you had to have someone basically manning a fire to fuel it consistently.
Mhm.
But I'm like, I was just really excited by this idea. Like ancient people are brilliant.
Yeah.
Like I can imagine that if they had like there's this right level of like intelligence with opportunity that something like this could exist and could happen. So
Mhm.
I love history. I love like weirdo history too. So this was right up my alley.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's where we're going. Courtney or Daniel, we need a tenant from you guys to like see how this careens off the fucking chaos meter. So like somebody go.
So I guess speaking of central heating, that would be very important in what I'm about to bring upon our world.
Oh boy.
I was thinking about the environments that we've created kind of throughout the podcast, and one thing that I felt was lacking was extreme cold. So I'd love to have this be like a not necessarily like all Arctic all the time, but maybe just much colder than Earth normally is.
Mm.
Or maybe the seasons are particularly extreme, or the winters just last much longer for whatever reason.
Sure. I mean, back then, there were mini ice
Yeah,
ages,
that's
right?
true.
So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, there was
very
literally a like mini ice age. I think in the medieval era. I want to say.
yeah,
Yeah.
and sometime in the 1800s as well.
Mm.
So I mean, there's a number of ways that we can kind of justify that.
Mm.
Number one, we can have it so there's a massive volcano that just literally clouds over the sky and makes
Mm.
everything colder for this time period.
Yeah.
Alternatively, we could just have it so it just so happens to coincide with a mini ice age that we're dealing with.
Mm. So it's kind of funny that you bring up volcanoes because that ties in with my second tenet.
How? No. We need Daniel
Okay.
to
Okay.
get us going. So we're gonna put a pin in that
Okay.
in the volcano.
Mhm.
Daniel, why don't you hit us with your aliens or some weird bullshit? Because I know it's coming.
It's funny that Courtney mentions volcanoes because now we
God
have, I
damn it!
think, 3 tenants that are probably completely in diametric opposition. So, like,
Mhm.
well, that can be resolved. But my tenant, as written, was this takes place on a volcanic planet like Mercury, where a toxic
Okay.
liquid similar to water is heated into steam to generate power, and instead of coal, rare earth minerals are used from the blasted landscape.
Hmm.
Ooh, I think that can work really well.
I think it could, because
Yeah.
we don't really know what the situation is in this society, in this alternate
Mhm.
history.
Yeah.
And if there's some kind of climactic disaster that Courtney's suggesting that happened, maybe this could all be possible.
It could be that like they're scooping up volcanic ash and like processing it a certain way
Mm.
that they're turning it into like coal, but
Yeah.
volcanic coal, if that makes sense.
I can see like
Like
some kind of
Yeah.
maybe like, okay, so maybe like Courtney's saying there was some kind of, well, I'll let her speak to the volcano, but something
Mhm.
happened that made the climate fucked up, right? And so
yeah.
Mhm.
let's say it's cold rather than volcanic, but there was maybe volcanoes are part of what caused it. And the resulting like garbage that comes out of that, maybe that's what they're using for their fuel, and maybe that's also made it difficult to access regular water.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ooh, I mean, that could very well work.
Yeah, I wasn't going to actually bring up like a major volcanic eruption, but I like that thinking, and that, you know, if there was a ton of ash, that would obviously cool things off, and also once the ash sinks down into the water, certainly have a lot of effects there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just like the idea that, you know, there's, well, okay, this is the problem where my brain is trying to do 7 things at once, okay? I'm thinking that because it's taking place in that area anyway, why not make it Mount Vesuvius, one of the most famous like volcanoes and one of the most famous eruptions. So why not just have it erupt again and have it be even worse? So this entire region is blanketed in ash, in volcanic ash, and as a result, like there's this dome of fucking cold around it, you know. So we have these minerals that they can be lumped together and processed in such a way that creates, you know, like a great fuel source for the steam engine, like Daniel was suggesting. It's all coming together already, and I can't believe that it is, because I was a bit nervous about bringing my tenant into this weird alt history thing. But I think this can work.
Yeah.
Can it be an even bigger disaster than just one region? Like, could it be a worldwide series of volcanoes?
Like some major like seismic event that triggers an entire,
Sure.
I like that.
Like maybe something cosmic happened that created all of these.
God damn it, Daniel.
I don't mean cosmic as in aliens.
The
I
aliens
mean like
visited and triggered all the volcanoes to
Yeah,
go
right.
off.
Well, you know, like some kind of like an asteroid, or I don't know, like the sun flare or something that caused seismic events all over the world.
Well, why does it have to? Because the Earth is so interesting on its own. Why does it have to be cosmic? Why can't it just be like the Earth itself is like, yo,
Or the Earth.
this shit out?
Yeah.
The Earth, that could be a Yellowstone sort of thing, like all over the world.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like why not have it be like something that's internal? And, you know, like let's say that multiple volcanoes all erupt all at the same fucking time.
Like a dinosaur kind of event is what I mean.
Sure, but we're at a point
not quite
in
as
history,
extreme, but
no, because that is
well, so they don't all die, you know.
Yeah. But there is this idea that why not have it be like, let's say 3 volcanoes, which doesn't sound like that much, but remember that one volcano erupting changes an entire planet for like years. So 3 at the same time, or at least very close to one another, like having a chain reaction is insanely world changing. And I think that's a great point that we can be like, okay, this is what happened. Mount Vesuvius erupted, then 2 other volcanoes erupted shortly after. So it created a worldwide ice age that is the result of this. And now we have Carthaginians with, you know, steam engine trains to get around and stuff like that, and to keep warm, because that's also going to be kind of important. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like even locally, having Vesuvius erupt in like a much more extreme manner, like what would happen to Rome at that point? How would that civilization even get through that?
We could have the situation be that like whoever developed this steam technology, they're predominantly the empire rather than any other, you know, one. I know we haven't really chosen an exact point in history, right? Or are we saying when this was developed is when this is happening, or when it's happening after that?
I had it in mind that pre-Roman Empire, so it's Roman Republic, but not Empire. And right before the Punic Wars is when my age kind of happened. So Carthage is still around. It's still a major player in that region. And Rome and Carthage are almost about to go at war. Mount Vesuvius erupts, wipes out a large portion of that, because Rome is far enough away that it wouldn't directly affect them in terms of like physical damage necessarily, but they would.
I more so meant like the civilization itself.
Oh yeah. But you're absolutely right in that, because it would weaken Rome to an extent where they probably wouldn't be able to directly attack Carthage in a way that they'd want to necessarily. So I think that that's where my time frame wants to be, is right before the Punic Wars in pre-Roman Empire Mediterranean. That's where I'm kind of situated in terms of a time frame.
And then that has so many implications for like even just thinking about when Rome occupied Britannia and Gaul and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, would that just not even happen if they didn't have the ability to expand out?
or the Celtic Holocaust
Right,
that
right, right.
Caesar did, or the idea that even our languages are based in Latin, and now that might change and shift, and you might have is it didactic or dual? It's basically two sets of like ancient languages, which now are very important. And again, this is why the history nerd in me is like, holy shit, this is so interesting, because you can also look at the ripple points of like, does this mean that Africa becomes, like under the Carthaginian Empire?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean
Mm-hmm.
that Africa is now a colonizer? Does that mean that it's there's so many questions that
Well,
I want to ask. Like,
this is
God,
why I'm asking about the time, because it sounds like what's more exciting is not the moment that history changes, but what happens after it. Maybe not necessarily farther in the future, but even
Mm-hmm.
like 50 years or 100 years to see the implications of that change. Because if we set it at
right?
exactly the moment when it happens, history hasn't really changed yet, other than
Mm-hmm.
there's volcanoes.
Well, I think that focusing on the pivot point and figuring out what and how changes, that to me is really interesting, because again, there are implications,
Mm-hmm.
but we haven't really discussed what those are necessarily yet. So
Sure, I just mean like going forward, like when we're creating the setting, are we creating it after that pivot point, or are we creating it in the pivot point?
I think that we should probably finish the rest of our tenets
Mhm.
and then kind of figure out what we want to focus on. Because
Right.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that right now we're still very early infancy in terms of this idea. And
Mhm.
even though I'm very excited about what this world might look like, there's still so many questions and so many other things that could change as a result of the remaining tenets that we have. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I kind of want to get into and focus on a little bit. So, Daniel, what is your second tenet?
So I had originally conceived of the setting being in a precarious like landscape, and such that the sun itself was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because I saw it as kind of a mercurial planet. So what I had written down was there's a giant steam powered magnet somewhere on this planet that protects it protects radiation from the sun or whatever power source is out there. That has to be continually operated, or else everyone dies.
Okay.
Interesting.
Interesting. Does that have to be real, or can it be something that they just believe?
I would like it to be real, because I was visualizing having to shovel stuff into it to operate it continuously.
Gotcha.
It could be like hundreds of millions of slaves. It could be, we can't have machines because they're not really there, but something like people have to actually operate this thing continually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So what would it be doing in this particular setting? Would it be like soaking up the volcanic ash?
Maybe. I mean, it seems like the environmental problem here is cold and the
Mm-hmm.
lack of sun from blocking out the sun, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It could be like something that provides environmental protection
Mm-hmm.
in a region. Like maybe
Mm.
Carthage has it.
It's like a giant air purifier.
But I want the risk to be that if you don't operate it, either everyone dies or it's like a massive disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. Maybe what we can kind of consider here is this idea that maybe ash continuously rains down.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, if you know anything about Mount Vesuvius, you know that that's a major issue. Do we want it to just be like, well, okay, can we tweak your tenet a little bit to where it's kind of like we have this thing, and during events like it's basically always on, but there are points where you can let it rest, right? And so like maybe it's like, okay, extreme caution time, we need this thing active and going hardcore because there's like an ash storm or an ash blizzard that's about to come in and essentially blanket our entire civilization in ash and smother us in a way. So it's something that is it's an emergency machine essentially.
I mean, as long as it has to be continuously operated.
My second tenant actually might solve that problem to some extent.
Uh-huh.
Oh, go on.
So I was thinking that it would be really cool to have geothermal and hydrothermal vents being the
Ooh.
source of much of the steam power that we're looking at here. So if there was like a geothermal vent that they were using that could essentially be continuously active, that they might need to supplement it at certain times, like you were saying, Rob.
Mm.
So, like, when there's more pressure against the system, they have to add to this vent or add to the power of the vent.
Yeah, or use some other like additional power source, if that's like the volcanic coal that we were talking about.
I actually like this a lot because I think that what this allows us to do, because the tenet is right, or the prompt is steam is king, right?
Mhm.
And if
Yep.
steam is king, then like why do we have geothermal? Like shouldn't that be the main power source? But I think that because Daniel's machine requires this thing be running constantly,
Mhm.
this idea that the geothermal, all of that is being used to power this machine. And so the regular folks are using steam because it's much more convenient because it's already there.
I guess I was like interpreting steam in a loose way, in that kind of associating steam power with geothermal power, like the steam rising up from the earth.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's like not what you think of when you think of like steam locomotives or something.
Right. Well, I think it works though. That's the thing. Like
Mhm.
I think that you can have the geothermal energy that is essentially powering a steam engine, but
Mhm.
like the main thermal vents and stuff like that, that's going to be what's being used to keep Daniel's death machine going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the mechanism that's harnessing the geothermal energy is a giant steam engine of some kind.
Mhm.
And like you're saying, it's enough to opt to turn it on, but to really use its protective power, you've got to shovel stuff into it to really make
Mhm.
it work.
Yeah.
Right.
And the more stress in the system, the more it needs. Because in terms of the narrative, I think the applications are, if this is, say, Carthage's in particular, that's a weak point now for them to be attacked. And it's
Mhm.
also a reason why they have more power than everyone else in the sense of safety, because
Mhm.
they're
Mm.
shielded from the environmental disaster. And it could protect them against the continual nature of the disaster.
One idea, actually, this is a little out there, but what if Carthage was responsible for the volcanoes erupting?
Oh,
Mm.
Like
yes.
they had been researching how to use geothermal energy to do something, and they decided to like create some sort of rift in the earth, and that caused a chain reaction that set off Vesuvius and whatever other volcanoes.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But then, of course, they probably didn't anticipate like, oh fuck, now the earth is covered in ash and we're freezing all the time.
Maybe that machine is what partly what did that, and now they use it to
Mhm.
protect themselves. But if it turns off, that rift will get
Mm.
worse.
Yeah.
Therefore, everyone dying.
Yeah, that
Yep.
that can work.
Mhm.
One thing I really need to clarify here is like Daniel's death machine, anti-death machine, right? So how encompassing is this idea that you had, Daniel? Because the concept as is right now is that if you're not under the protection of one of these like anti-death machine things, you're just dead, which means that most of civilization is wiped out and we're looking at a
Mhm.
bleak post-apocalyptic situation. And I want to clarify that now so we can kind of figure out the themes that we're kind of exploring here.
Mhm.
I'm not thinking of it in that way. I was if this were Mercury, but but since we have like an empire and potential collision between our empires, I'm thinking that like Carthage is just a much better place to be because it's shielded from
Mm-hmm.
all the
Mhm.
environmental harm. And
Right.
the risk, I guess, is that if this machine is turned off or damaged significantly, it's gonna, because of what Courtney just said, it's gonna cause massive destruction across the planet. But in
Mm-hmm.
particular, it protects Carthage.
Mhm.
See, that's what I'm curious about. Is so what does the world outside of Carthage look like? Is it a desolate ashen wasteland? Is it that is like freezing and ashen and like you don't want to live there? Is it like going to inhibit empires from rising, which essentially creates or turns Carthage into an Eden of sorts, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Or is it a matter of this machine needs to stay on so the world can be relatively normal?
Yeah. I kind of want to avoid the Eden thing because I feel like we
As do I,
sort of
yeah.
just did that with this glowing city.
I agree, yeah.
And I was thinking maybe we could keep the volcano situation a bit more localized to like Europe and North Africa,
Mhm,
so that other parts of the world aren't nearly as screwed up from it, and that still allows other empires to form,
mhm.
people to interact, and that way Carthage isn't like holding the entire world's fate in its hands.
Right.
What are the boundaries of the narrative, though? Is it
Mm.
Carthage and its enemies and allies in that area, or is it the whole world?
Well, that's what I'm really trying to figure out is that like I'm trying to figure out what the scope of the story is going to be from here
Mhm.
on out. You know what I mean?
Because if the boundaries of narrative are local to Carthage, so its surrounding neighbors, and the disaster is local to that, then the rest of those countries don't really matter. Like, we don't really care about what's happening outside there. So in that case, like, its protective shield is important in terms of
Mm.
its environment being better than theirs. Now, I don't know if that means outside of it, it's total apocalypse, but it might mean that, like, they just have better crops and their land is safer and it's a huge competitive advantage
Mm.
over the other ones.
We've got ourselves a bit of a sticky wicket here. Not gonna lie. Yeah.
I mean, it really depends on what kind of. Do we want to talk about a story that's for the whole world, or do we want to talk about a story that's local to Carthage and what's surrounding it? Because it sounds like that's what we want to talk about.
Well, that's just kind of the focus that I had in terms of like a pivot point. Because again, we were discussing earlier, like where we want to set this in terms of the time period, right? So this is the pivot point, and then we can now say, do we want to talk about Carthage as it is, as this disaster is happening, or
Right.
do we want to talk about 300 to 400 years after this has happened and figure out what the implications are that have since rippled out in perpetuity, you know?
Yeah, I think the implications a couple centuries ahead would be more interesting to explore.
I think so too.
Okay. So if that's the case, what does Carthage look like now? It still needs this machine, right? To keep everything safe, but it's hundreds of years later. That's what we're kind of Can we have it so this machine is basically is preventing another volcanic disaster from happening?
I think so. I think if what they did, from what Courtney said, is they were using it to experiment and then they caused a problem, I'm sure like its operation is crucial to that. Like, turning it off is what's going to cause that to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. I still have a million billion questions that we've really got to kind of nail
So,
down.
I mean, if we're a few hundred years in the future, does that mean that, like, Carthage, and this is a question for Europe because of its projection into history,
Right.
have they, like, done what the Roman Empire did, since they've defeated the Roman Empire, essentially?
Well, I would imagine that because the Roman Empire is demonstrably weakened, and because Carthage, the thing about Carthage is that it was never really a warlike city. It was always the commercial, at least as far as we know, right? There's so much propaganda and there's so much false history. Like, there is a point of historical fact that is highly contentious, which is Carthage used to sacrifice children, and that in and of itself is like layered and layered and layered in terms of like ancient historical propaganda. Like, is that like something that actually happened? Is it something that the Romans said happened to kind of like smear Carthage in the aftermath? There's a bunch just in that question alone, but I'm not going to get into that because, again, there's a lot to it. But what I would like to see, and this is what I think is a huge historical point, is because of this thing happening, the Roman Empire does not happen. Rome might still exist as a smaller empire, but as we know Rome, it just doesn't expand the way that it does.
Yeah, that's what I imagine too. Right?
Yes, because I can't imagine with Carthage having this much power that it's going to not prosper as opposed to Rome, right? Now, getting back to Carthage a little bit, Carthage, again, is a more commercial-based civilization, if we want to talk in video game terms, right? It didn't really have a standing army. It would actually just buy a bunch of mercenaries whenever war needed to happen, for the most part, right? You have famous, Carthaginians like Hannibal, right? There's a great video on Extra History. It's a YouTube channel that you can watch on the Punic Wars. And it's like such a cool story because it's got like everything. It's got like blood feuds and like there's a bunch of really great, cool stuff about that. So anyway, again, you can tell that I'm super fucking excited because history, but that's what I'm going to say is that ancient Rome, the Roman Empire doesn't happen. Now, from that alone, we can look at that point and say, okay, the genocide of the Celts and Gallic people by Caesar does not happen, which means that now Germany is completely different, right? So like, what does that look like? We can point to a bunch of other things that are Greco-Roman or Roman Empire specific. What do y'all want to focus on here? Because I could go on and on, And like Courtney had suggested earlier, like, what does Britannia look like? What does Hadrian's Wall look like? Is there a wall at all? No, of course not, probably. What about aqueducts? Like, there's so many questions because there's no Roman Empire that we have to ask and we have to figure out.
Yeah, even I was thinking like all of their road systems that they put together.
Yes. The other thing, Romans and legionnaires even were all famously like fantastic engineers. They created roads wherever they went, and they were able to build fortifications and forts remarkably well wherever they went. So I can imagine that kind of philosophy still exists.
Yeah.
However, it's far more defensive now. It's more of a, we need to survive, let's build this kind of shelter really quickly, that type of thing.
Yeah, like maybe they turned into more nomadic people and tend to travel around, build up shelter when they need it, kind of scavenge from the earth to survive as they go.
And I do want to point out one more thing, is that whatever our conjecture might be, it is going to be wrong, because we cannot guess as to what might have happened in history. So if anyone's getting really tightly wound up as to like, well, obviously that's wrong, fuck that. Like, don't have that in your mind. Just understand that we're coming at this from a very fantastical point of view. So whatever we're talking about, if it's wrong, write us a letter, let us know, like, here's what might have changed. But that's I want to get that out again, because we're dealing with alt history, and that in and of itself is like such a fucking hornet.
Well, I mean, like, and who is to say, like, it doesn't matter how much historical knowledge you might have, you can't predict what will happen. You can't definitively say X or Y happened. All you can do is make your case, and one might sound more plausible than the other, but no one could really know, So if you're criticizing us, well, fuck you.
I want to say, like, that's okay, but also fuck you. Like, I want to make sure that we get both in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like, granted, if we said something that wasn't historically accurate, that's one thing. But a projection is fictional,
Yes. And one thing I do want to focus on again here is, right, like, we're missing two big points within the prompt itself that I do want to sit down and talk about. One, Kaiser gave us the suggestion is, what is the modern conflict that we're seeing now? And two, what is the major secret that is going on? And those are two things that I think if we focus on now, we will have a much clearer vision for what our setting will look like in this alternative history. I think that those two questions, once we answer them, those are the key to the rest of what we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, couldn't Carthage's sort of creation of this disaster and also their hold over the status of other volcanoes, could that potentially be the secret itself?
It seems like it would be.
Yeah, like, I mean, I don't think other civilizations would be aware that they were the ones responsible for this, nor that they have some sort of machine that, like, keeps everything else from going nuts.
I mean, it may not be apparent either why Carthage is in such better condition than everyone else.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
It could just be like a we were favored by the gods type situation.
With that, though, I mean, espionage is sure to happen. So what does that suggest? I mean, like, America wasn't able to keep the secret of the atomic bomb for more than 5 years. Like, Carthage would even be leakier than that because of how, just civilization worked. Right. So I imagine that secret gets out rather quickly.
Yeah. But I mean, even then, like, would people necessarily believe that? Like, you were talking about how there are sort of rumors that historically Carthage had sacrificed children. Like, could it be similar to that, where a lot of people just see that as like some weird rumor that some guy decided to spread?
Well, that was like a deliberate historical type of thing on the part of Rome to do that.
Yeah.
There's a great line that I always think about when it comes to ancient history, and I'm sure I've said this on the podcast before, and I will say it again, which is, ancient history is, as we know it, is false, but we must believe it to be true. And what that means is that everything that we look at in terms of ancient history is wrong because the people who wrote it had an agenda. Even Herodotus, who is known as like the great-great-grandfather of history, he had an inherent Greek bias that he's not going around being like, oh, well, the Persian Empire this compared to the Greeks. It's like, no, his accounts are incorrect, but we have to believe them because without that information, we have no knowledge, no true knowledge of the past. So want to toss that out there again. I love this shit. My jam. I love it. It's great. I want to get back to the conflict though. In this potential secret, is there maybe a continual kind of espionage war going on? And I think that's a great idea, Courtney, is that maybe that's where we focus on, is there's a propaganda war that's happening.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that Rome could still be a player, and maybe like instead of being kind of the imperial domination that they were about in the past, like they're more about being the small rebel faction that's seeking to undermine Carthage through propaganda.
Yeah.
And political intrigue.
Part of me can't help but think that Rome gets just absolutely smashed to pieces by Gaul and the Celts at some point too.
I'm thinking they're in the position that, of being a small faction that's no longer relevant, and their goal is to expose Carthage's treachery against the world.
Yeah, and I think the fact that that region is kind of ruined is almost beneficial to them in a way, because it means that other groups are less likely to invade if it's just like, this place is full of volcanic ash, we can't farm here, we can't do anything. So the survivors are kind of left to their own devices.
Can we do one thing though? I know that we love a good plucky underdog story, but can we make Rome not the good guys for once?
I mean, they don't have to be good with being a rebel faction. I'm just saying that the power relationship is that Carthage has the power and Rome is a small rebel faction.
I really want, when you say rebel faction, I'm thinking of like Star Wars, I'm thinking of the American Revolution. These are all positive things. I want them to be fucking terrorists. I don't want them to be rebels. I want them to be agitators, terrorists. Maybe they're the ones who are trying to take down this machine.
That's what I was thinking. And I mean, in some ways, like, whoever writes history or whoever wins decides like terrorist versus like noble rebel faction.
Yes.
So yeah, in this case, I do think that it would make sense for the surviving Romans to be trying to sabotage this machine, and potentially as just like a fuck it, if we're gonna be ruined, then everybody else has to be fucked too.
I'm okay with that. It very much aligns with what I know of the Roman kind of spirit of that time, where it's like, fuck you, got mine, like that type of thing.
I mean, it's fair to say any of these civilizations are not necessarily good guys. Like, Carthage withholding the information it's withholding is pretty evil unto itself.
And more to that point, there's no such thing in history as a good civilization. It is inherently neutral. It is inherently selfish, because all it wants is to propagate and grow and control.
Yeah, I mean, so nations are rational actors, right?
Yes, we can agree on that for sure. Yeah. So is the secret the Carthage secret, or is it something else?
Yeah, no, I'm happy with it being something else. If you guys want to,
that's a genuine question. I'm bringing this up because we have the Carthaginian secret already built in, right?
I think it's simple enough. Like, I don't see a need to complicate that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that's not a bad idea either.
I mean, there's probably a twist of some sort, which would change the nature of the secret, but we haven't really gotten there.
You say that because we're almost at the twist at some point.
Right. Like, well, I mean, like in any big secret, there's always some twist about it. That's what I mean to say. Like, it's always like yes and to the secret, and then there's some ripple in it that makes the big bad guy not as bad, or it makes the good guys not as good. Like there's always some narrative trick with the big secret.
Yeah. Rob, had you done your second tenet? Was it like all kind of mashed into one at the start?
I basically crammed 7 tenets into one.
Yeah, that's fair.
With mine. So I'm fine with just the mega tenet that I had and started out. I didn't really have anything because I knew that was so specific and also like massive that I'm like, this is all I need for this episode. I really don't need to bring in a second tenet. Yeah. Because like I said, it's more like several tenets rolled into one, but anyway, that's not important. So what's the modern conflict now? We have the secret. I would like to focus on a conflict that is not related to the Romans. It is, let's say that Carthage is the big player now. they're having their agitprop war with the Romans, with the Roman terrorists. Can we come up with another conflict that might be equally interesting, but unrelated to Rome?
I wish I knew more about Africa in this era, because I feel like it would be interesting to explore that area too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like maybe creating a Ptolemaic league with like Carthage, Egypt would be really interesting.
Oh, idea that's not really necessarily related to a conflict or anything, but what if, due to volcanic activity and extreme heat, like the Saharan desert became a field of glass?
Glass, you say?
I like
That's
that.
interesting.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Let me hold on.
Let's do it. I don't care what the science is.
This is okay. If we're saying fuck it to the science, then that's fine.
I mean, when you heat up sand, rather, it turns into glass, right?
Right, but I mean, what we're talking about is, I thought we were going extreme cold. So where did that happen?
I think we said extreme temperatures.
Just the initial explosions, or the initial volcanic activity.
Gotcha.
Did that, and then the ash made everything colder.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ooh, glassy, cold landscape. That's neat.
That is neat. I hate to be this guy who's like, oh, but there's no volcanoes near the Sahara.
I know.
But like,
this is alternate history, though. There could be a volcano there as a result of all these weird seismic experiments that were performed.
Carthage just fucked everything up. Yeah.
The thing is like, this is impinging on the domain of science fiction to an extent, right?
Yeah, that's true.
What I mean to say by that is, like, every time some technician will tell you that can't happen because of X, all it takes is you to ask the right questions of a different technician into sense of, how can I make this happen? And then you put those things in play and it works. So like if someone's out there saying, oh, there can't be glass in the desert, that's ridiculous, I'll just ask some other geothermic physicists to ask them, how can I make that happen? And they'll find a way.
Okay. How about this? Maybe we can find a way, because when this major event happened, it cracked open some kind of tectonic plate, and there's like a bunch of magma that comes up and super quickly, like, just basically glassifies half of the Sahara. How about that? Does that work?
Yeah,
there you go.
That works.
Okay.
And obsidian too could come out of that.
Yeah, you can have a mix. Why not?
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
All right. So we've got this. I also like the idea, by the way, that there is like a Tunisian, or rather a Carthaginian / Egyptian league. Like, if you look at a map now, where Carthage was is where Tunisia is today. Then Egypt's all the way in the east, and then in the middle there's Libya. So let's say, for the sake of this, that Carthage, as we know it, the Carthaginian League, is Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt in a modern map, right? And then we can kind of go from there. That's a massive empire, by the way. Like, that is essentially what is the Greek, or rather the Roman Empire. But because we have trains, guess what? It all works out. It's fine.
Well, I mean, could that be the other conflict? It's something having to do with
we could have like train robberies.
Right.
Oh, but like Iron Age train robberies.
Right.
Yo, that's crazy to
like,
think
how
about.
about something as simple as, maybe they're trying to establish the first I mean, there's obviously train networks that have already been created over these hundreds of years, but maybe there's like some giant passageway they're building that requires cooperation within this league and requires finagling of all these, interests. And it's this big enterprise, and that's the conflict that's separate from them trying to destroy the world, the Romans.
Okay. What do you mean by that? Let's start over.
So, like, think of it like, okay, not that we're doing this, but like, suppose you're building like a transcontinental like highway, of the future or something. And not that I'm not saying we're doing that in the setting. Doing that requires all kinds of negotiations with everyone along the way of that passage. So maybe there's some kind of giant rail passageway that's being built to make commerce way more efficient across all the nations in this league. And so they've got to like cooperate with each other and figure out who's going to do what. And that's where you get your train robberies.
So you're saying, Daniel, that they're trying to create a massive train system over the glass Sahara.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I was envisioning that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Super
Because the
cool.
Sahara is famously something that prevents a lot of travel and a lot of trade from happening. You had caravans, you had caravanserais that were specifically designed with that in mind. But now that that's basically gone, yeah, boy, is something that can happen now.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So the conflict is economic, really, and then that gives you a lot of fun things you can do with it.
I like the idea that there is a bunch. Now we're talking about like Central Africa that's getting involved. Now we're talking about, because we can leave, kind of Europe to be cold and miserable on its own. And then we can talk specifically about Africa and what that might look like in terms of historical stuff. Because like, oh man, I think where we are right now. So we're talking about like 500 CE at this point, correct?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Or what year did we start?
Right around like 80 CE, 80 BCE.
Okay.
So around that time, like Iron Age-ish, but like on the cusp of like that transition over. I think what I would need from the rest of the setting in order for me to feel good about it is for us to like have a little bit of time for me to do a little bit more research into ancient African history. So I can really like come back and be like, oh my God, you guys, here's what we've got, I think that here is a great stopping point where we can kind of talk about maybe adding in a twist and then going from there. How do y'all feel about that?
Yeah, that works for me. I agree that I would like to do some reading before we do the next episode.
Fantastic. So we've got a lot of really interesting stuff going on here, and I think it's time to add in a twist. Before I do, any other last minute comments, shots in the dark, what have you?
Nope. I think we've also kind of decided the parameters of the narrative, and that we're not really interested about what's happening across the ocean. At least not yet.
Yeah, we're still talking about like North Africa, like Mediterranean era specifically, right?
Yeah.
And then and we might even go south into like Western or Central Africa, something like that.
Yeah. So it seems like Africa, that kind of area is the focus.
Yes.
Yeah, and probably a bit of the Middle East too as we expand out. Yeah, I was thinking actually that what's that like enormous volcano in Iceland? Maybe that was also in this, and that's why Europe is just like extra fucked right now.
That's what I was thinking as well. Yeah. Just completely rewrite history and then talk about what happens. Yeah, that's not hard. Yeah, that's fine. All right, so our twist is going to be everything you know is wrong. I think that's accurate anyway. But in this particular instance, I think that's going to be really... I think there's a lot to work with here. So I'm really fascinated to see what's going on there.
Ancient astronauts, obviously.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It was
no, we can just say ancient aliens the entire time. All those ancient alien shit, that was true.
That's ancient astronauts.
That's
yeah.
So okay, so we're on the same page. Great.
Exactly.
That will do it for this episode of World Build with Us. We're going to deal with that twist next episode. And if you want to submit your own prompt like Kaiser did and have us build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, follow the instructions where it says submit prompt or whatever the button's called nowadays, and we will build your world within a reasonable amount of time. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so over on Twitter at Let's World Build. Or if you want to join our community on Discord, you can do so with a link for that in the description. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can go to our Patreon and give us money over there and get exclusive patron-only episodes, and as well as all sorts of other cool stuff like getting the podcast early, all that good stuff. But enough of all that. That is this episode of World Build with Us in the bag. Remember that we love you very much. We're going to get through this together. Until next week.